The sun was sinking behind the jagged mesas, casting long shadows over the dusty town of Red Hollow. In the distance, the whistle of a train echoed across the canyon, a sound that always made Maribel Thornhart feel a strange mix of longing and regret. At 30, she carried herself with a quiet elegance, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sunlight, her green eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for someone who had long since vanished. It had been 10 years. 10 years since the night she met him, the Apache warrior who had stormed into her life like a desert wind, fierce and untamed. They had crossed paths in the most unlikely of places, the old Silver Spur Saloon, a dimly lit refuge for travelers, gamblers, and drifters alike. She remembered him clearly, tall, with shoulders broad like the canyon cliffs, skin bronzed by the sun, and eyes so dark they seemed to hold centuries of secrets. He had introduced himself simply as Ahuli, a man whose presence made every other soul in the room fade into insignificance. Maribel had been alone in Red Hollow, managing her father's ranch after his untimely death, a life of endless chores and solitude. Ahuli arrived like a storm, riding through the dust in a horse that seemed as wild as its rider. When their eyes met, there was no need for words. There was only an unspoken understanding, a pull stronger than the desert wind itself. That night, they had shared a fire behind the saloon, away from the curious eyes of the town. They spoke little. Their conversation was mostly silences filled with the crackle of flames and the whispering desert breeze. The passion between them had been undeniable, raw and consuming. Maribel had never known a man could look at her and see her soul, not just her body. And Ahuli! He had touched her as if the world outside those flames no longer existed. By morning, he was gone. No letter, no promise, just a shadow disappearing into the horizon. Maribel had waited, at first hoping it was a temporary absence, then realizing slowly that life without him would have to be endured. She had poured herself into the ranch, tended the fields, repaired fences, and occasionally wandered the desert, hoping for a glimpse of that familiar silhouette on the horizon. But the years passed, and the desert gave nothing but wind, dust, and memories. Red Hollow had changed over the decade. New settlers had arrived, a railway had cut through the outskirts, and the old saloon was now a place of quiet commerce rather than raucous revelry. Maribel herself had changed. The carefree, hopeful girl of 20 had hardened into a woman shaped by loneliness and endurance. Yet she never stopped believing he might return. Each sunset brought with it the fragile hope that the desert winds might carry him back to her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden clatter of hooves on the main street. A rider was approaching, and something in the rhythm of the horse's gallop stirred a familiar ache deep within her. She stepped onto the porch of her ranch house, her heart pounding as the dust rose around the figure. For a fleeting moment, she dared to imagine it 10 long years of longing culminating. In this single instant, the rider reined in just beyond the corral. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but the posture, the aura, the raw strength in his movements, all of it was unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? After 10 years of waiting, did the desert finally answer her silent prayers? But the world had a way of testing patience, of making hearts tremble before revealing the truth. The rider dismounted slowly, and as he turned, Maribel's eyes met the same dark, penetrating gaze that had haunted her dreams for a decade. Ahuli, alive, real, standing 10 feet away, every bit the wild, untamed force she remembered, yet carrying the weight of untold stories etched into the lines of his face. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The desert wind swirled around them, carrying with it the scent of sage and sand, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then, in a voice both rough and tender, Ahuli spoke. You waited. Maribel swallowed. emotions threatening to overwhelm her. 10 years of longing, 10 years of empty nights, 10 years of wondering if the man she had loved even remembered her, boiled down to 3 words. And in that moment, she realized that some bonds, once forged, were unbreakable. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep violet. For the first time in a decade, Maribel felt the stirrings of hope, a fragile ember rekindled by the man she had never forgotten. The story of their reunion was about to begin, but neither of them knew the trial of secrets and dangers the next days would bring, because in the Old West, love was never simple, and the desert never gave up its mysteries without a fight. The air between them felt thick, as if the desert itself held its breath. Maribel's heart raced, a decade of longing and unanswered questions pounding in her chest. Ahuli stood 10 feet away, his broad shoulders taut under the fading sunlight, muscles rippling beneath bronzed skin, his tribal jewelry glinting as he shifted slightly. The wind caught his long black hair, and for a moment Maribel couldn't move, couldn't speak. She could only stare at the man who had haunted her dreams for 10 long years. Finally, her voice came, quiet but steady. "You came back." Ahuli's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability hiding behind the intensity of his dark eyes. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said, his voice rough like gravel yet carrying warmth. I wanted to return sooner, but—" His sentence hung in the air, unfinished, heavy with untold stories. Maribel felt a mixture of relief and frustration. 10 years had passed, and in that time she had imagined every possible explanation for his disappearance. 10 years, Ahuli. 10 years I waited for a shadow," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she refused to let tears fall. She had grown too strong for that. Ahuli took a step closer, his boots crunching on the dry earth, and Maribel noticed for the first time the lines etched into his face, the subtle scars of battles, the marks of a life lived hard. He was not just the same fierce, untamed man she remembered. He was tempered, stronger, yet carrying a weight she had never imagined. "I had to protect something." "Someone," Ahuli admitted finally. His eyes flicked toward the horizon as if the desert itself was a witness. "I could not risk being followed, Maribel. The journey back, it's not safe for either of us." Maribel's anger flickered. "And what about me? Was my heart supposed to wait in silence while you vanished?" Her voice was sharper now, cutting through the quiet desert air. "Do you even understand what it's been like?" Ahuli's jaw tightened. He looked down, and for the first time, Maribel saw hesitation, doubt, and sorrow mixed with regret. "Every day," he said simply. "Every single day I remembered you. The fire we shared, the night we were together, it never left me. But returning too soon would have destroyed everything I was trying to protect." Maribel's chest ached. She had imagined his return so many times, rehearsed every possible scenario, but hearing him speak of secrets and dangers made the reality far more complicated than she expected. She wanted to run to him, to demand answers, to cling to the man she had loved before she knew loss. Yet something in her gut whispered caution. This reunion, no matter how long awaited, was not simple. Ahuli extended a hand, the gesture commanding yet hesitant. "Come, let's walk. There is much to explain, and time has shaped both of us in ways we cannot ignore." Maribel studied him for a long moment, then slowly took his hand. It was warm, strong, familiar, the touch she had dreamt about for 10 years. As they walked together through the desert toward the ranch house, the first stars began to shimmer above the mesas, tiny witnesses to their long-awaited reunion. Once inside, Ahuli removed his worn, dusty cloak and set it by the fireplace. The fire's flickering glow reflected off his tribal ornaments, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Maribel busied herself making coffee, her hands trembling slightly despite her efforts to appear composed. "I need to know," she said finally, breaking the silence, "why you disappeared. Why you left me without a word." Ahuli sat across from her, his eyes dark pools of honesty and pain. "Enemies," he said simply. "I cannot explain fully now. Not yet. But the people I crossed, the debts I paid, they would have followed me here. You would have been in danger if I returned openly. I had no choice." Maribel's heart softened slightly, but the wound of abandonment still throbbed. "And what now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ahuli's gaze met hers with unwavering intensity. "Now, I stay. You waited for me. I will not let the next 10 years pass in silence." The words hung between them, heavy and electric. For the first time in a decade, Maribel believed. Yet the weight of Ahuli's secrets pressed on the edges of her hope. The night outside deepened, filled with desert wind and whispers of what was to come. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring questions, revelations, and possibly dangers neither of them could predict. But for tonight, they had each other, and after 10 long years, that was enough to ignite the spark that had never truly faded. The morning sun rose over Red Hollow in streaks of gold and amber, dust motes dancing in its light. Maribel Thornhart moved through the ranch house quietly, each step measured, her mind heavy with questions. Ahuli sat at the wooden table, drinking coffee, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the horizon. The silence between them was thick, a reminder that even though he had returned, the past was far from resolved. "I need to know everything," Maribel said finally, setting her cup down. Her green eyes were steady, but her voice betrayed the tremor of emotion she had tried to hide. "If you truly stayed away to protect me, I need to understand who or what you're running from." Ahuli's gaze met hers, dark and intense, but his expression held a shadow that made Maribel's heart tighten. "There are men who would see me dead or worse, see me taken," he said carefully. "They follow blood debts, old rivalries. 10 years ago, I chose to vanish rather than let them bring danger to you. It wasn't easy. Not a single day." Maribel's throat tightened. She had imagined many scenarios of his disappearance, but the weight of real danger made her chest ache. "And you think just showing up now will fix it? After 10 years? You can't erase the fear, Ahuli. You left me alone, waiting." "I know," he said, his voice rough, almost a whisper. "And I will spend the rest of my life making it right. But there is no time for recriminations. Not when they are still out there." Before Maribel could ask more, the distant echo of hooves struck her ears. Her heart jumped. Ahuli's hand moved instinctively to the necklace he wore, a tribal talisman of protection and warning. "They're close," he said, voice low. "I can feel it. Someone has followed me here." Fear coiled in Maribel's stomach. "Then we need to hide. Prepare." Ahuli stood abruptly, muscles rippling as he moved. "No," he said firmly. "We need to face them, or they will never stop coming. Red Hollow may seem quiet, but it is too open, too exposed. We leave now." Maribel hesitated, her heart torn between fear and the undeniable pull she still felt toward him. "Where will we go?" she asked, knowing he had a plan she would have to trust blindly. "To the mesas," he said, eyes dark with determination. "There are caves and hidden trails the settlers do not know. It is the only place we can truly be safe, at least for now." The journey began at noon. Ahuli led her through winding desert paths, their shadows stretching long in the blazing sun. His hand occasionally brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent shivers down her spine. The land was both beautiful and unforgiving, jagged rocks and canyons cutting through the earth like scars as they traveled. Ahuli finally spoke more of the life he had led during their separation. I hunted. I moved from place to place, never staying long, he said. I protected families, fought battles that should have been forgotten. And every night I imagined returning to you. But the threat, it never let me rest. Maribel listened, torn between admiration and heartbreak. 10 years of waiting had hardened her, yet hearing him speak of sacrifice and danger stirred the girl she had been, the one who had fallen for him so completely on that night in the saloon. By late afternoon, the mesas rose before them like ancient sentinels. Ahuli guided her to a narrow crevice leading into a hidden cave. Inside, the air was cooler, and the shadows seemed to embrace them. Maribel felt a strange sense of safety despite the raw danger that clung to Ahuli. I should have brought you here sooner, he admitted quietly, his gaze meeting hers. I wanted to. I wanted to explain, to stay close, but I could not risk it. Now we can have a moment. For a little while. Maribel nodded, stepping closer to him. The warmth of his presence, the scent of the desert and sun on his skin, made her heart ache with longing. For a little while, she echoed, but the words carried a promise she hoped they could both keep. Outside, the wind howled through the mesas, carrying whispers of the desert and secrets yet to be revealed. Inside, Maribel and Ahuli shared a silence that spoke volumes of fragile trust rekindling. But the shadows of the past still lingered, waiting to test them both. The night would come soon, and with it, the first confrontation. But for now, in the quiet of the hidden cave, they could breathe, if only for a moment, and remember why a love that survived 10 years of absence was never truly broken. The hidden cave offered temporary relief, but neither Maribel nor Ahuli could ignore the tension simmering outside. The desert wind whispered through the narrow crevices, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the promise of approaching danger. Maribel had learned to trust her instincts, and they screamed that this was only the beginning. Ahuli knelt by the fire, carefully checking the edges of the cave for signs of intrusion. His muscular frame, bronzed and adorned with tribal jewelry, gleamed under the flickering light. Maribel watched him, the firelight dancing across his defined shoulders and the stern expression etched on his face. Despite the danger, she felt a thrill, both fear and desire intertwined, reminding her why she had waited 10 long years for him. They're close, Ahuli muttered, his dark eyes scanning the shadows beyond the cave's entrance. I can sense the men who have waited for an opportunity like this. They don't know exactly where we are, but they will find us if we are careless. Maribel swallowed hard. What are we going to do? Ahuli stood, muscles rippling, and walked to the narrow entrance of the cave. He lifted a hand, motioning for her to stay back. We fight only if necessary. First, we watch and understand. Knowledge is our weapon. His voice was calm but carried an intensity that made Maribel's heart race. Hours passed in tense silence. Shadows shifted with the fading sun, and the wind brought distant sounds hooves striking rock, the snap of branches, voices carried faintly across the canyon. Maribel's grip on her shawl tightened, her green eyes never leaving Ahuli. He seemed almost part of the landscape, a force of nature as fierce and unyielding as the desert itself. Finally, as twilight bled into night, Ahuli motioned toward her. We move, he said softly. There's a hidden ridge farther up. From there, we can see them before they see us. Maribel followed him up the jagged path, the cliffs rough under her boots. Her pulse quickened, not just from the climb but from the closeness of Ahuli. Each step reminded her of the night, 10 years ago when their lives had briefly entwined. And now the memory fueled a longing that had never faded. At the ridge, they crouched behind a boulder, the desert stretching endlessly below them. In the valley, flickering lanterns marked the presence of men enemies, as Ahuli had warned. They were armed, moving cautiously, unaware that the warrior they sought was watching from above. "They've grown bolder," Ahuli murmured, eyes narrowing. "But they don't know the land as I do. We have the advantage." Maribel's fear mingled with admiration. His knowledge of the terrain, his calm under pressure, it reminded her why she had trusted him, why her heart had clung to him through a decade of absence. "What happens if they find us?" she asked quietly. Ahuli turned to her, his expression both protective and tender. "Then we fight, together." Night fell fully, the sky a blanket of stars over the desert. The wind carried distant howls, and Maribel felt a shiver run down her spine. Ahuli's presence at her side was both comforting and electrifying. A reminder that the bond between them was more than physical, it was survival. Trust, and a love that had endured the cruel tests of time. Suddenly, one of the men in the valley stepped forward, raising a lantern that cast long shadows across the rocks. Ahuli's eyes flicked to it, and in an instant, he moved with the speed and precision of a predator. He signaled Maribel to stay low, and she obeyed, her heart hammering as he disappeared into the shadows, silent as the desert night. Moments later, he returned, the tension in his muscles easing only slightly. "They are scouts," he said, testing the waters. "They will come closer by dawn. We must be ready." Maribel nodded, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. The danger was real, and yet she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. The man she had waited for 10 years was not just back, he was fighting for her. For them, for a chance at a life together. As the night deepened, they huddled near the fire, the shadows of the cave wrapping around them like a protective embrace. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, but tonight they had each other. And after 10 years of longing, that alone felt like victory. The first light of dawn crept over the mesas, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson. Maribel Thornhart and Ahuli remained crouched on the ridge, their breath shallow, hearts pounding. The scouts had returned under the cover of darkness, and Ahuli knew the full force of their pursuers would arrive by mid-morning. Time had run out. They could no longer hide. "Stay close," Ahuli whispered, his hand brushing hers for a fleeting reassurance. His muscular frame was taut with readiness, chest bare, tribal jewelry catching the sun like shards of fire. Every line of his body spoke of strength, agility, and the raw power he had honed over a lifetime. Maribel drew a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. But there was no denying the thrill and fear that surged within her. From the valley below, the enemy had begun their ascent, unaware of the pair lying in wait above. Ahuli studied them with a predator's precision, noting their movements, counting their numbers. "We don't need to fight all of them," he murmured. "Just enough to scare them off. Let them know Red Hollow has defenders they cannot anticipate." Maribel's pulse quickened as she realized the danger was imminent. Her fingers gripped the edge of the rock, knuckles white, yet she felt a strange calm in Ahuli's presence. The fear and longing of 10 years boiled together, fear for her life, longing for his touch, and awe at the man who had returned to her. Stronger and untamed as ever, Ahuli's eyes flicked to her, dark and intense. "Trust me," he said simply, a statement that carried the weight of a decade of absence and unspoken devotion. She nodded, knowing instinctively that her survival, perhaps even their future, rested in his hands. The first scouts reached the base of the ridge. Ahuli moved with the fluid grace of a desert cat, slipping silently down the rocks, his bare feet finding purchase where others would stumble. Tribal jewelry clinked softly, a reminder of the man she had loved and the warrior he had become. Maribel held her breath, heart in her throat, as he disappeared into the shadows. Moments later, a commotion erupted below. Shouts rang out, echoed against the canyon walls. Ahuli had ambushed the scouts, his strength and skill overwhelming them before they could react. He moved like a force of nature, disarming and subduing with precision, leaving the men scrambling in confusion and fear. Maribel's worry surged. She wanted to run to him, to scream at him to be careful, but she stayed low, trusting him completely. Each time a shout rang out, her pulse raced, yet each time she saw Ahuli emerge unscathed, her admiration and longing intensified. He was not just the man she had waited for, he was a force that demanded awe and reverence. After the skirmish, Ahuli returned to her side, slightly dusted with dirt and sweat, chest gleaming under the morning sun. He extended a hand, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern softening the sharpness in his voice. "No," she said, shaking her head, but the relief in her voice was unmistakable. "But you—" Ahuli smiled faintly, a rare expression that softened his otherwise intense demeanor. "I'm fine. The desert and I. We've endured worse." For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the wind and the distant cries of retreating enemies. The first confrontation had ended, and though the threat was not gone, it had been postponed. Maribel studied him, muscles glinting, eyes still intense, and felt a swell of gratitude and love. He had returned, yes, but he had returned fighting, not just for himself, but for her, for them. "I waited 10 years for you," she whispered, voice trembling. I hoped you would come back. But I never imagined it would be like this." Ahuli's gaze softened, and he leaned closer, his hand resting lightly on her cheek. "I never stopped hoping either, Maribel. And I never stopped fighting for you. The past 10 years, they made me who I am. But now I am here. And I am yours." The wind swept across the ridge, carrying the scent of sage and dust as if the desert itself approved of their reunion. Yet beneath the relief and tenderness, both knew the journey was far from over. The men who hunted Ahuli would not give up, and Red Hollow's peace remained fragile. But for the first time in a decade, Maribel felt a glimmer of hope, a future with the man she had never forgotten. A warrior who had endured the past to return to her dot as the sun climbed higher. Maribel and Ahuli prepared to descend into the valley, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they were stronger, united not only by passion but by survival, trust, and a love that had withstood 10 long, lonely years. Night had fallen over the desert, and the mesas loomed like silent guardians. The battle earlier had left both Maribel Thornhart and Ahuli exhausted, yet their bond had deepened with every heartbeat of danger they had survived together. They had returned to the hidden cave, its shadows now a sanctuary rather than a prison, the fire flickering weakly against the cold night. Maribel sat close to Ahuli, the warmth of his bare, muscular chest radiating against her back. She traced a finger along the lines of his tribal jewelry, the small movements bridging the gap of 10 long years. "I never thought I'd see you again," she whispered, her voice trembling between relief and lingering fear. Ahuli tilted his head, letting the firelight illuminate his long black hair and bronzed skin. "I never stopped thinking of you," he murmured. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, now held a softness reserved only for her. "Every decision I made, every step I took. I hoped it would lead me back to you." Maribel turned to face him, green eyes glistening. 10 years, Ahuli. I imagined every possible reason for your absence, every possible story. But I never stopped loving you. Not once." He reached for her hand, holding it gently yet firmly. "You were my constant," he admitted, voice low and raw. "Through every battle, every danger, every lonely night, I carried the memory of you. That one night, that fire between us, it has burned within me for 10 years. Her breath hitched at his words. the vulnerability of the man she had loved so fiercely blending with the untamed strength she had always admired. The desert outside whispered around them, the wind weaving through the cave like a witness to their confessions. "I waited for you," she said softly, resting her head against his chest. "Even when hope seemed impossible, I waited, believing you would return." Ahuli's hand came to her hair, brushing it back with gentle precision. "And I returned," he said, the conviction in his voice undeniable. "I returned to keep my promise, even if it took 10 years. But there are still shadows we must face. Enemies who will not rest until they have claimed what they believe belongs to them." Maribel lifted her face, meeting his intense gaze. "Then we face them together," she said, her voice filled with unwavering resolve. "Whatever comes, I am with you. 10 years has taught me that love, true love, is worth fighting for." A faint smile touched Ahuli's lips, rare and fleeting, yet it carried a warmth that melted the last of her doubts. "Together," he agreed, and for a moment the weight of their struggles seemed lighter. The night stretched around them, vast and infinite, the stars reflecting the promise of a future forged in resilience and passion. They sat in silence for a long time, letting the world outside the cave fade. Maribel rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the rise and fall of his muscular frame. In the quiet, Ahuli began to recount moments from his decade-away battles fought, lives saved, and the constant thought of returning to her. Each story carried danger, triumph, and regret, but also the unwavering thread that tied him to her. "I feared I would never find you again," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "And yet, here you are, stronger, braver, more beautiful than I remembered. I was a fool to think the world could keep us apart." Maribel smiled faintly, brushing her fingers across his arm. "We were always meant to find each other again. The desert, the years, they could not break what we have." Ahuli's gaze softened, lingering on her face with unspoken devotion. "Then we will face the dawn together and whatever comes with it. No more running. No more waiting. Only us." Outside, the desert wind hummed against the cave walls, carrying with it the scent of sage, sand, and freedom. Inside, Maribel and Ahuli sat together, shadows and firelight dancing across their skin, united not just by desire, but by a love that had endured the tests of time, danger, and separation. For the first time in a decade, the future seemed possible. And for the first time, they could both believe that the night they had shared once long ago was only the beginning, not the end of their story. The first light of dawn spilled across the desert, painting the mesas and canyons in gold and rose. Maribel Thornhart awoke to the soft warmth of Ahuli's bare, muscular chest beneath her cheek. The events of the past night, the danger, the confessions, the quiet intimacy under the stars still hummed in her veins. Finally, after 10 long years, they had survived together, and the bond they shared had only grown stronger. Ahuli stirred, dark eyes opening to meet hers. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough yet gentle. His long black hair fell over his shoulders, tribal jewelry glinting in the rising sun. There was a serenity in his gaze that Maribel hadn't seen before, a man at peace, yet alert, carrying both strength and love. "Morning," she replied, brushing her fingers along his arm. "Did we really survive it all?" Ahuli smiled faintly, a mixture of triumph and affection. "Yes," he said, "and we will survive whatever comes next. The desert tried to keep us apart, enemies tried to chase us away, but here we are, together." They rose and emerged from the hidden cave, the desert stretching endlessly around them. The wind was gentle now, carrying the scents of sage and earth, a reminder that life continued even in the harshest landscapes. Ahuli scanned the horizon, alert, But the tension that had gripped him for 10 years seemed lighter now, replaced by quiet determination. "I thought I had lost you forever," Maribel admitted, walking beside him. "Every day I imagined your return. Every sunset I hoped it would bring you back. And now you're here. You're real." Ahuli reached for her hand, holding it firmly yet tenderly. "You were always real to me," he said, "even when I couldn't be by your side. The memory of you gave me strength, Maribel. You were my anchor, my fire. That night we shared, it was more than passion. It was destiny." Maribel's heart swelled. 10 years of waiting, longing, and doubt were washing away in the warmth of this reunion. "Then we make our destiny now," she said softly, her voice resolute. "No more waiting. No more hiding. Whatever comes, we face it together." Ahuli nodded, dark eyes scanning the horizon one last time before settling on her. "I've fought many battles, survived dangers you cannot imagine. But nothing was harder than waiting for you." They returned to Red Hollow, not as fugitives or strangers, but as two souls reunited and unbroken. The townsfolk watched in awe as the mysterious warrior, once thought untouchable and untamed, walked hand in hand with the woman who had waited a decade for him. Whispers followed them, tales of love and courage spreading through the town like wildfire. At the ranch, Maribel and Ahuli stood on the porch, watching the sunrise together. The land they had both endured, the desert, the mesas, the trials now seemed to cradle them in its vastness, giving them a chance to rebuild, to live openly and freely. "I want to stay," Maribel said, leaning into him. "Here with you. No running, no hiding. Just us." Ahuli pulled her close, his muscular arms wrapping around her, tribal jewelry clinking softly. "Then we stay," he promised. "Red Hollow is ours. Together, we'll face the world and the shadows that remain. But tonight, and every night after, we are finally free." They watched the sun climb higher, bathing the land in light. For the first time in a decade, there were no shadows of the past darkening their hearts. The battles, the enemies, the long years of waiting, they had endured it all. And now at last they could build a life together, a love forged by fire, tested by time, and unbreakable in the face of every storm. Maribel smiled, her hand in Ahuli's. 10 years was worth every second, she whispered. Ahuli pressed his forehead to hers, dark eyes shining with unwavering devotion. "And I would wait 10 more, 100 more. For you." The desert wind carried their words as if the land itself celebrated their reunion. The past was behind them, the future stretched endlessly ahead, and at last their story, one of love, patience, courage, and destiny, found its perfect ending.